So please stay at your seat. His Holiness is coming, so we can welcome him in the Gompa in a nice way. He will be just in few seconds inside. He's just coming.
A very good afternoon, Your Holiness, the 17th Gyalwa Karmapa, and a very good afternoon to each and everyone present here. Actually, I would also like to request Lama Champa Thaela. We are about to launch our book, the much awaited book, and we would also like to have Kempo Lobsangla and Kempo Shampela to be with us. Well, I'll very briefly introduce you this very simple event. Actually, on this very auspicious occasion, we are coming up with a much awaited book, a commentary on Gelongma Palmo's praise to Noble Avalokiteshvara. Okay? And so I'm sure that all of us, we are very much familiar about the contributions of Gyalwa Palmo, and especially the work done by Gyalwa Palmo, dedicated for the practice of Avalokiteshvara. So today I think we are here for the right purpose, with the right people around, and especially in the presence of His Holiness the Jawa Karmapa. The Karmapa International Buddhist Society would like to release the book, a commentary by Professor Gen Sampadojela. And of course, taking this opportunity, I would also like to, because to have come up with this publication, we have many individuals, we have many great souls and great personalities who make this even possible. For example, we have Lama Champathayala. In fact, originally the text was in Sanskrit, right? And then Venerable Bakurando Nyamala from Ladakh, who requested Professor Gyalwa Dojela to make this translation from Sanskrit to Tibetan. And Gyalwa, of course, he did it so well in time. And today, in fact, physically, Gyalwa is no more with us. But his research, his articles, his books, his contributions are always with us. And that will always be the enlightening guide for all of us here. And then, of course, we also have a Lama Champathayala, who did the revision of the book, who did the proofreading, the final proofreading of the book. And then at the same time, there are many other members and individuals, because in order to have a publication like this, we need hundreds of heads together. We need a dedicated members together. And for all this, I would like to acknowledge that effort. I would like to acknowledge the contribution given by all our respected members, including Lama Champathayala. And of course, may I now, Lama Champathayala, may I have your spouse with us too? Your wife, please. Madam Albena, please join us for this book releasing program. Because I'm giving a very special mention of Lama Champathayala and entire family. Because while doing the proofreading of this book, even Lama Champathayala's children, they also extended their technical support to do the proofreading. And of course, wife is always next to Lama Champathayala when and as required. So thank you so much. And with this, I would like to request Your Holiness to release the first fresh copy of Gyalwa Palmo's Potu, the commentary on Gyalwa Palmo's praise to Avalokiteshvara practice. And for us, Kibi here, this is a much awaited book, a commentary on Gyalwa Palmo's Potu. And from today, we'll make it available both in library of the Kibi and Kibi bookshop. And of course, in the process of doing the revision, in the process of doing proofreading, in the process of publishing the book, in the process of designing the book and everything, we also have our Kibi librarian. The librarian Kibi Penzo Tadam. Alilas. Kibi librarian, of course, everybody knows her. And there are other members also from Kibi who did everything for this publication. So here we are the Gyalwa Palmo's, the book commentary by Gen Sampadojela. And with this, I would also like to request Your Holiness to share a few words with us on this publication, please. Your Holiness, la. Just a few words, la.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it is indeed a great pleasure to be and pleasure and a great honor to be able to have this occasion to celebrate this commentary. As we all know, or most of you know, as a first and foremost, the practice of Papa Cherezi or Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, how much of how essential it is, how beneficial it is to be able to have it in our daily prayers, to be part of our daily prayers, and then on top of it to have the precious commentary by the late Gensenpa Dorje. And I'm sure all of you also know or have at least met him or have had the opportunity to be around his presence, to be able to receive his teachings, and how valuable it is to have had someone like him to, even if we don't know or we are not able to comprehend what he was, giving to us, but nevertheless, I think it is our great merit to have had the chance to meet him. And then now we get to have the opportunity to have his very words in the form of commentary to be part of our daily lives. So I hope it will be of great benefit for all of you. I hope you'll have a lot of enjoyment, and I hope through this you will be able to accumulate immense merit. I myself am one of the lucky ones to be able to have him as a teacher. He was a gift, one of the most precious gifts that was given to me by late His Holiness Kunzi Shamar Rinpoche. And so just from my own personal understanding that he was not just a teacher or a professor, but a great human being. And so these are his words, and as he would always like to say, I think that it's not really his words, but through his own learning, through his own contemplation, meditation, for all of his life that he dedicated towards practicing the Buddha Dharma, that he was able to have an opportunity to repeat the what is known as perfect speech, meaning the sadhana, the practices, the meditation of Chenrezig is considered one of those teachings where it is perfect speech. And so we have the opportunity now. Yes, so I hope you will have a great time, and may you be able to benefit from it, and then pass it on, share it with others, and fulfill our aspiration to becoming a Bodhisattva. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and Lama Chamba. I'm also very happy that you have given the proofreading. It comforts me because you're an Englishman, so otherwise it can be quite jumbled up. So thank you very much. and thank you for the publication. And we must appreciate everyone who was involved in this, the whole team. I'm sure it's mentioned in the book, and so please think of them and offer your appreciation to them as well.
Sunam je dola benjara sanjen do para jo sanje je don so je chona chanjo bardo dane javzo je daje jenzo je be zonon dola benjara sanjen do para jo sanje je don so je chona la chanjo bardo Daje jenzo jebe zonam je dola ben sanjen dobai joi zemjen damje dewa dan deve jodan tembarai joje donga jodan donga mebe dewa damba da mende vai jorje nere jodan nedan Tanyam Sembo La Nebai Joroi Je Zemje Domje Dewa Don Deve Jodan Dembrai Dewa Jorje Dongai Mebe Dewa Nyere Jagda Nyedan Deve Danyan Sembo La Nebai Joroi Je Zemje Domje Dewa Don Deve Jodan Dembaj Donga Da Donga Je Dawa Je Donga Dewa Donga Menda Wa Je Nere Jada Nyeda Danyam Jemba La Neva Jorai Saje Bechu Chushe Medoi Dan Rera Linje Ninda Jemba Sanje Shende Migde Pulwai Joge Namda Shenlai Jebarai Shoi Chazai Wadai Cheche Shabadai Jezoi Yeran Guje Zawai Gyalwa Jungse Daje Jezab Tamje Zobe Jangje Jengoi Wo Jamde De Jambe Yanglai Chaza Loi Gange Lede Jemye Jendai Nyedai Namdai Rabza Chenye Dengwe Jeje Zeje Nyeje Dogai Leban Kandai Sebe Zerai Mar Mendam Dongai Jeze Dozai Golai Boje Darje Yelai Tuju Rudrai Chedoi Nyemoi Nyeloi Leje Chadoi Chonze Mare Mazoi Dongai Nyogo Chenye Jenze Rade Noi Dene Daje Saje Darje Yanden Lenzoi Jaze Tuyo Goi Chodai Chodai Chonye Jen Dale Meze Jambe Yang Loi De Zende Jeje Jerai Vezre Je Dale Temo Mba Rapsal Ne Kadai Den Shong Loi Dobai Le Bobe Nawa Zadoi Soloi Semje Namje Samba Na Loye Jedai Chedai Vai Chujon Tomoi Degbai Chuje Koloi Gorodoi
Jula Katin Chimbo Gone, Jason, the Uson to Jim, one of the to Jim, one of the Uson to Jim, one of the so.
Once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the viewers. One thing that I forgot to mention yesterday was that to everyone who are here and everyone who may be viewing this or listening to this, it's personally from my side, it's very important to know, for all of you to know, that if one truly wishes to practice this and learn this in the proper way, then how to say, even logistically, that it is, it makes sense to find teachers or individuals who, with whom or to say, or from them to study these texts. And then spend time in engaging this yourselves. What I'm saying is, as I always used to say, is nothing more than a gibberish, because how to say, I don't assume to know these precious teachings, its depth, its insight. And as this is not just a talk of trying to copy the great Bodhisattvas of their practice of being humble, but I'm being very honest. And so therefore, what I'm saying is just, my own thoughts, thinking out loud. And hopefully through that I will be able to entertain you and, for all of you to have a good time. That's pretty much it. Of course, the motivation behind it is I like to think that it is for everyone's benefit, in whichever way or in whatever amount it contributes to that. And so, yes, that's something I wanted to be very clear. Then, personally, on a daily basis, as I said yesterday, I think that if we constantly or regularly, on a regular basis, if you read this root text, already it will, how to say, give, as we would like to call, blessing. And if you read the commentaries, then and also read, various different types of commentaries. So you don't have to fixate yourself in one commentary. And by doing that, then, as I said yesterday, it'll the text or the teaching or these maybe better than teaching, these profound words will speak to you and will engage with you in a way that as if it is your best friend that is communicating with you, talking to you, being there for you, guiding you, giving you hints, questioning you, and so on. And so therefore, in that way, then it will become really meaningful. Yes. Otherwise, just attending a session like this won't do much. You may have a few laughs, or you may have a few questions, but that's about it. It won't go that far. Maybe at the end of each session, maybe there were one or two remarks that made oneself a little bit puzzle, and thought, that was curious, but maybe it won't go that far. But the books are books, of course. It is great to see that in this modern world there are these trends, such as trends of, in general, meditation, trends of reading books, trends of living healthy, having good diet, and so on. Of course, they are all very commendable, and I'm sure they will also benefit you in many ways. But often with that kind of habit, my personal feeling is that it may not go that far. Because yes, these are also books, just as all the books that we may find in libraries or in gift shops or in markets, and so on. My teachers, they always said that these profound words that are composed, what is known as treatises or commentaries, and then of course the sutras. These are composed not just out of the blue, Someone had a trip and then just blurted out all those before they forgot, which I do a lot. If those posts that was put up during the pandemic, they were all not carefully put together. Actually, they were just my own emotions just blurted out. That was it, nothing more. But whereas these teachings is different. One is the composers themselves were, one way of saying is they were realized. And another way of saying is that they are artists, masters of their craft. And so therefore, what that means is that they practiced all their lives from their predecessors. Sorry. And at the same time, through years and years of contemplation, then, with very careful consideration, then they put together these words. And so therefore, in short, what it means is that until the practice, until the Dharma really got absorbed, absorbed through experience, experience meaning through understanding how life actually works, then they compose. And then comparing what they experience with their fellow practitioners and their teachers or predecessors, then they put these teachings together. And so therefore it's not just like a thesis or a self-help book, but it's one could say it's sort of plagiarism, because at the end of the day, I think each of those composers, they understand that they themselves have nothing to say, because the more they practice, they feel that nothing needs to be said actually, and so therefore each of them at the end end up composing or teaching what their predecessors have said, and so it's kind of like copying. So the meaning behind that is that there is no ego behind, you know. There is no ego behind or agenda behind what they compose. That's the beauty of it, yeah. Because when most of the time when things are written, there is always some form of how to say, unclear motivation behind, or at least, you know, mixed up. Sometimes in the beginning there was a good motivation, and then halfway through one became a little bit emotional and personal, and then or sometimes the other way around, you know. So that's why these teachings are different, and what my teachers used to say is that the difference comes from when you read these texts or these books over and over, when you read them, you won't get the meaning in one go. Whereas most of the things that are written nowadays, once read, it's over. You know, there's nothing more in there. There's not much depth in there. And I'm not saying that from my side, but that's what my teachers used to say. And so therefore, the more you read, you discover something new. The more you read, another thing. And then, because of that depth, then you can feel that it speaks to you, and that's why I said that you can begin to grow a kind of respect where you feel that this is your friend. And so therefore, if you read it over and over again, then it'll become clearer and clearer. So the other aspect is that when you read these teachings, particularly the way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhicaya Avatara, then another comfort probably that you will find is that you don't need to have any kind of formality in a way, you know, not like a formal meditation or something like that. It's something that you can read at any time, at any point. And so if it becomes a part of your daily ritual to read, then the more you read, the more you understand, and yes, it'll be wonderful. So I would highly implore for all of you to do that. Okay, and yesterday I think we were at the verse 62, I think, yes. And somewhere in between I was talking about what was it? Maybe just a sort of a recap of the first chapter of the Bodhicaya Avatara, where it displays the benefit of upholding the bodhicitta, and from there then I began a gibberish by saying it's similar to opening your heart, you know. And then I happen to use a strange word. It's a way to become vulnerable, and then that might have caused some confusion, maybe, I don't know. And so therefore, vulnerable meaning that it's just another way of saying that you have, it's a way to, upholding the bodhicitta is a way to what we always say, abandon our ego, you know. And so therefore, in that way, it's almost like saying becoming vulnerable. Because we are often afraid or maybe not all of us, but maybe sometimes we feel that we have a hard time opening the heart for various reasons. And so therefore, the upholding of bodhicitta or practicing the Bodhisattva vow means to develop a kind of a trust, a confidence, you know. And so this, by doing this, it's almost like saying, making yourself vulnerable. Because then you open the door for lectures, you open the door for criticism, and so on. And so often it's kind of like a habit for society to protect oneself against those, you know. And so therefore, it feels like as if you're making yourself strong. It feels like you're preserving dignity and so on. But actually, for the realized beings, I'm sure that they have gone through the same challenges as we all do. And then they have tried to see if that works, you know, by not opening one's heart, by not making oneself vulnerable. And then through repeated attempts over a life, or over rebirths, then they come to the conclusion that it amounts to nothing. That at the end of the day, it's really, there is not much point other than just to, you know, take down that guard. And then you let in, and then, how to say, criticisms become teachings and wisdoms, and then as we say, then we grow and then we develop, and so it is in that respect that I said it's sort of like being making oneself vulnerable in a way. Of course, if you follow these teachings, particularly this particular teaching, then it is advised or devised in such a way that we do it with care. We open our heart with care, meaning more like saying we care our emotions, you know. We give consideration to our anger in this case, so that we are not trying to just bulldoze our anger and destroy it, but instead we are very considerate of our anger, and then slowly, according to how my anger is, flaming, and then expressing, then accordingly we work with it. So in the same way, then each of us have our own anger, and being honest about our anger is, I think, making oneself in a way vulnerable, you know, because it's something that we were taught from our loving biological or non-biological parents, our very first teachers, you know, that teaches us to not to reveal, let's say, one's emotions, not to reveal one's anger. They're doing it. They gave those words. They gave those guidances out of love, of course, out of great love, out of great care. But they knew no better, and so therefore that's the only thing they knew, and that's what they passed on to each of us. And so therefore, to say, in some ways it's really rare to find skillful and wise parents or teachers. But nevertheless, whether they were not skillful or not, whether they were wise or not, we have to be very appreciative of them for what they have taught us. But now here, in this ground or in this state where we can absorb these teachings, then these teachings then slowly unveil or find a way for us to understand that those mindset, those attitude, to say, can be abandoned, and that we can be honest with ourselves and be to say, and then open ourselves up. Yeah. Of course, it may be very, very inappropriate in many ways, but there was a movie, I think, some time ago. It was not from my time, I think, called Network, I think. And I really like that part, that I forget that character's name, where he's on television and then he's saying, "I'm mad as hell," and something. I forget the line. Sorry? Yes. So it's that's very dramatic, but nevertheless, it's something like that, where you be honest with yourself. So rather than confronting someone, even if it's your parents or siblings or what we nowadays like to use the word best friend, and just like a VIP with a VIP sort of thing. And they are best of friend. And even to them, if we have to open up, sometimes it's difficult, right? To make ourselves vulnerable, it's difficult. But to these teachings, you can be very open, And so therefore, in these, each of these verses, they are, if you really allow it, if you open yourself to it, then you won't find these words like criticism. Instead, you will feel like, "Oh, that makes sense. I never thought it that way. Why didn't I do that?" And so it won't make you feel guilty. It won't make you feel regret. Instead, it will make you just simply realize that all it took was just changing one's perspective here and there, and doing the most mundane things in slightly slightly different, and that's all it took. That it didn't acquire some sort of monumental effort to change oneself, or to alter oneself, or what we like to call to become a better human being. That there was no such monumental effort. That all it took was just a slight change of perspective, a slight change of gesture, a slight change of attitude. That's all it took. And so therefore, that's how precious these teachings are. And so from the verse 62 onwards towards many verses. Yes, one other thing is you really feel that there is a lot of repetition, you know, and that's something you have to bear, because sometimes you might feel it's like nagging, you know, but there is a point here, because how do we develop habits? Yes, it's through repetition. For example, anger. It happens through repetition, actually. Today, just slightly getting annoyed, then tomorrow being a little bit upset, you know, and you feel that it's an allowance, you know. No harm done. And so, in that way, I really respect the sort of rituals that other religions have, that no matter where they are or who they are, that first thing in the morning they do their own religious prayers. At night, whether one call it confession or not, that they perform those practices. And in that way, being Buddhists, we are a little bit too lenient in some ways. But probably maybe that's part of the enjoyment. But nevertheless, I think in the early days of Buddhism, I think there were practices like that. I mean, it's still, those practices still exist, you know. Like, for example, the practice of refuge to do in the morning and before going to bed. Especially before going to bed, the practices we do, during that time, if, for example, let's say, I'm not saying you have to, I'm just, you know, saying, like, before going to bed, reciting the 35 Buddha Sutra, it may be labeled as a practice of confession, but it's more of just, it's more of a practice of awareness, you know, because in a day, the moment you get up until bedtime, so many things have happened, and that you have a very difficult time of tracking those. And like what late Gyalwa used to say, if we are attentive, if we have a bit of awareness, we would know how many steps it'll take to get up to the first floor. That's not going to bring world peace. That's not going to end the famine. That's not going to liberate all sentient beings. But it begins from there, you know. It begins from being attentive to the most mundane aspects of life. And so, the 35 practice of Buddha is actually a practice, actually more for that, you know, more for awareness. It's not really for confessing, actually. It's just trying to remember what happened today. Yeah. What kind of breakfast you had, what kind of lunch you had, what kind of dinner you had, simple things, and then what kind of toothpaste you used, or do you need to replace your toothbrush, very simple things. And then by going through that, then slowly you can also recollect whether there were moments where I was annoyed, or whether there were moments where I was upset, And no need to, regret or feel guilty about it, because it's gone, It's completely gone. Yeah. We can regret immensely, but no matter how much we regret, it won't make any difference because it's completely gone. Yeah. But we can be aware of it, and we don't have to tell your best friend about it, but you can tell yourself and just be aware of it, And then it builds up, I think, slowly, a habit. And so we do this regularly, repeatedly, and in the same way, these advices are the same, They repeat a lot. Yes, if you know Tibetan and if you read it from in Tibetan, the text, I know how important and useful it is to have, I don't know what you call, sort of like a categorization of each verse belongs to this chapter, to this section, and so on. That used to really get me, actually, when I was studying. Because memorizing that was really boring. I always used to think, why not just, go directly to the words, to the verses, and to the commentary? Why do we have to know this is the third of the fourth and fourth of the fifth, I'm sure maybe all of you, or some of you might have felt the same. But nevertheless, those kind of categorizations then help to get rid of the bore, that the boredom, that it's not repeating, But otherwise, if you remove all of that, it is kind of a repetition. But as I said, there is benefit in those repetitions, because then you build up a habit, You build up a habit over and over and over again. And how to say, then before you know it, then it has become, the practice or the teaching has become part of who you are. Just like how anger can become a part of who you are, or not even a part, but you are anger, In the same way, then you are the practice, So you see, in that way, then it doesn't really require much effort. It's extremely simple, applicable, and doesn't require muscles or stress, and it doesn't make you also rush to think of progress, how far you have reached. And so in that way, okay. Daniel is messing with me, I think. Yes, repetition. Then, from the verses where we started from yesterday, and from where we will continue today, as yesterday I said something about livelihood, and so we may neglect that part, basic things like food, shelter, clothing, and then I suppose medicine and so on. These basic things, one could say for survival, but it's not really about survival. No one needs to survive. But the basic necessities that society requires, and if one is a practitioner, even a practitioner, if you're born as a human being, we need those basic necessities. It's only natural. Yet at the same time, when we develop a kind of confusion about how to say, maybe the organization of those necessities, then it can cause great confusion over time. And as I said yesterday, man-made tragedies often, or most of the time, they are rooted to that. The division of resources. Like for example, nowadays, one of the basic necessities would be electricity, mobile gadgets, and in this case, probably streaming. So yes, as with time, some things get added up, but then many issues, such as maybe rights or who should be responsible for the division, and so on and so forth. Then, that's how societies grow, yeah. But nevertheless, then things many unnecessary things appear out of that. And particularly for a practitioner, concerning social now order, or how to mend those confusions, I'm not going into that direction because I don't know how to fix those things. But what I can understand from a spiritual perspective, then if I put it that way, then then, for example, this teaching then shows that it's not really saying, how to say, just abandon everything and go to a cave. Just because these conditions of being dependent on basic necessities bring so many turmoil. But instead it's saying just investigate one's motivation, and how we relate to them, and how much of an awareness we can have towards those basic necessities in terms of usage, in terms of collection of resources, how we spend them, by doing that, by just simply being, as I said yesterday, like just simply by watching, watching, observing, being aware, pretty much the same thing, or being mindful, then, how to say, over time, and doing this repeatedly, of course, then over time, if we feel that any of these conditions should, like you can almost sort of predict, that if any of these conditions that I'm dependent on, are they giving a rise to my emotions? And then if they are, then because you are now so well aware, meaning you have a very good vision, without having to be told, without having to be directed, that you are aware. And so therefore, meaning aware of consequences, aware of where it leads, or it may lead, and through the practice of mindfulness, then you also very well update, very well updated with how your anger sort of functions, and how receptive it is. And so then accordingly you can, if you have to abandon, let's say, a certain dependency that we have, sometimes even literally, then we have no hang-ups about abandoning them, and we won't have any resentment or regret later on. And so these verses are sort of focusing on that. And so I remember those strange words I used to use: power, fortune, and fame, from time to time. And so those three things, they're not poisons really, but those three things just go along with us wherever we go, because we are human beings, and human beings need to depend on others, and therefore it's a society. And so therefore, especially for practitioners, if we are not well aware, then these very simple things, it's just plain old food, plain old clothing, plain old shelter or house or whatever. It could be a monastery, it could be a temple, it could be a center, it could be your home, anything. That these very simple things can suddenly turn into something very destructive, meaning a cause, an indirect cause for anger, an indirect cause for jealousy, an indirect cause for just not wanting to be happy. Simple as that. Right? So first read the Tibetan, then the English. Jinda dala mega wan tine tsendeyam tsejina dala sawar mejina dana chiche temende nyebe prache chepeche kaden dadam dana dagi nyeban dendo dibatan tember ne dana tingni xiangle lonso yunring someron dada yunring ne judin chiwe dunga teni malam lojer denyo ne sebro joba kanyo da jenshi yutsam denyo ne sebro joba kanyo seba da nika lanya deva tene chimome tsering tsedon nika chiwe tuzo tendrasi nyeba mambo topgirde yunring tuzo dejin chombe chokpa jejin do demon labar tongbo do kade nyeba sogina dizi sonam chashina nyebe dondon dogina sonam sedi minjurum kange dondon dasum Tenyi kati nyamjuna dikpa mbashi jeba ya samba teko jishi je kati samji nyamjibe minyi mhala tushina jela minyi jolanju tashin chiti tramaji madeja na ralepa tepa mela tuzina nyamonchi la ralepa minyi mhala chime zu kuzu choden damjuna chashin jibra jeba laang daki shidan milik sanje solo numenga lama nyinla sopa da hiran nopa chino lang hami suji kendal Njurwan Tonyon Trovado, Lujin Namla, Semen Nigan Nujin, Semen Chite Karduka Devi, Nepa Zubuja, Lala Mombi Nebaja, Lala Monte Token, Tela, Jume Kangaja, Jundan Chite, Kanshi, Kangajanda Nujibele, Hunte Jiji Tamji, Lela Ralen, Dagatella, Chite, Contadan Tone, Chine Tamji, Penzun Janza, and Jova to the Dagan Sunumdala, Dimdaji, Bena, Chimsi Jubila, Chimshin Shibu Sonin, Zaso Kanan, Chejiba, and a Chungjan Dovari, Torwayin, Torik. Dijin Kalan Samchan Shadamin and Chejuba Sonum Sibur Toba Yetan Day Melot, Seji Mijilajit, Kate Tana Chimile, Kate Migi Dungan, Yamatan Chimile, that the Dungan de Zamayan, Dag Zabramin, and Yavi Dungan, Towaji, the Domiji. Debit and the sellers on Yavaton Donjon, Dag Rangan on the Janji to Yamajus, and then there's a Mila, 20,000 Dungan, Dungan. Gawambashin the Janji and then Kate Gavete to the Egyptian and the teachers that are Gamma and Chuja Gavete was the Denjon Kanamant and then Dambanaja. Jendu by in Chojan. I read all this because yesterday I realized that I didn't read certain parts in Tibetan yesterday. If you have that, please excuse my punctuation, okay? Because, anyway, if you think that your hatred towards one who disparages you is because he drives away sentient beings, why does your anger not also arise when others are defamed in the same way? You have patience towards those who are unkind because their ungracious behavior is directed towards someone else, but you do not have patience towards one who disparages you when he is subject to the arising of mental affections. My hatred towards those who revile, is it? And violate images, stupas, and sublime dharma is wrong, because the Buddhas and the like are free of distress. As in the preceding case, one should ward off anger towards those who injure spiritual mentors, relatives, and friends by seeing this as arising from conditions. Harm is undoubtedly inflicted to on beings, either by sentient beings or non-sentient beings. This distress is felt in a sentient being, so endure that pain. Do some wrong. Oh, sorry. Some do wrong. Okay. Maybe. Some do wrong out of delusion, while others, being deluded, become angry. Among them, whom do we call innocent, and whom do we call guilty? Why did I previously act in such a way that now I am harmed by others? All are subject to their own, to their actions. Who am I to alter this? Realizing this, I shall strive for virtues so that all will be loving, all will have loving thoughts towards each other. Basically saying, make love, not war. When fire spreads from one burning house to another, one should bundle up the straw and the like, take it out and discard it. Likewise, when the mind burns with the fire of hatred due to attachment, one should immediately cast it aside because of the fear of burning the body of merit. Yes, that's what I meant that time, that if you have, developed over time enough awareness, then without having to feel, without having to be sensitive, meaning fussy or sort of worried, then if there are anyway, it'll come later, I think. If one who is to be executed has a hand amputated and is released, is this unfortunate? If a person is freed from hell by human suffering, is this unfortunate? Yeah, that one. Of course, it has a sort of graphic image to think of, but nevertheless, it's just common sense, yes, or maybe not logic, but maybe more of common sense in a way. That one YouTube that I saw, sorry again that I'm going like that, I should be actually quoting great Bodhisattva's text and not go this way. And there, it was, I think, a tractor which collects the grains from the field. I don't know. There's a particular name for it, I suppose. Either way. Sorry? Okay. That showed that actually the crops were actually burning. It had caught on fire. And so this farmer, with I think one could say professionalism, one could say skill, one could say talent, but quick thinking, spontaneous thinking, and had the common sense. And so therefore he knew that you cannot put out that fire. It's not possible at all. And so therefore he just kept going right next to the edge of the fire, which is really dangerous, and kept speeding all the way until the end of that farm, and just so that the rest of the crops won't get burnt, And so therefore there are times like that where you just have to let go, where you just have to abandon. And so same thing, let's say, in cases like this, if there's a terrible infection and it's going to harm the rest of the body, then amputation or surgery or whatever we call it, that, through common sense, in order to preserve life, then one would do that, right? That would be the advice of the doctor. So in the same way, if one compares oneself with of course here it says if a person is free from hell by human suffering, so therefore it could be misunderstood that of course it's talking about endurance, but then the endurance can be sort of viewed probably not, maybe a little bit too grim, and so therefore just by abandoning a cause, that might trigger your anger, something very simple. It could be, I don't know, it could be about who sets the table, I don't know, or who decides what to cook, In kitchen there are a lot of wars, yeah? Especially among chefs, or the lead cook. And Of course, I've never worked in a restaurant, so I don't know, but I've heard that chefs can be really tough. And if there are two sort of alpha male, then it can lead to great war. So, things, that are that simple, that mundane, if one has the common sense, meaning, in other term, awareness, then one knows that this is not going to end well. This is going to lead to nowhere, and so immediately you abandon, and instead going through the whole process of arguing who's right, who's wrong, who's at fault, having to summon the manager to broker peace and ceasefire and so on. That's hell, yes. Because it just doesn't make sense. Because once you have the awareness, then you realize that it's not going to lead anywhere peaceful, and so therefore immediately whatever it is. So if you have to step down or if you have to step away, you do it, right there and then, because you know how this is going to proceed. So it's not really enduring, that particular kitchen suffering, but it's a sort of as I said, having a clear mind, or in this maybe it might not fit well, but having an open heart, and so therefore you let go. So it could be concerning who gets praise, who gets recognition, who gets more fortune, who gets a better shelter, who gets a better quality of clothes, who gets a more organic food, and so on. The list just keeps going. And so in that moment, you see, then you have the complete strength, not even strength, just the ability to just drop it, drop organic food right there and then. And in this case, just stick to instant noodle. And you don't bother about whether there is MSG or how it is close to plastic, So in that moment, you just drop it, and you don't uphold organic, So it's that simple. Because thinking that the perfect nutrition is everything over and over again, that could lead to hell. It could lead to just being totally fussy, and then having to check the labels of every content that we buy from the supermarket, read the labels, how much calcium, how much potassium, okay, this has added sugar, this has no added sugar, this has aspartame, real hell. If one is unable to endure even the slight suffering of the present, then why does one not ward off anger, which is the cause of pain in hell? Thus, solely due to anger, I have brought myself into hell thousands of times and have not brought about benefit for myself or for others. But this suffering is not of that kind. I don't know. I was trying to cover my burp, actually. But this suffering is not of that kind. It will bring about great benefits. Only delight in suffering that eliminates the suffering of the world is appropriate here. If others find pleasure and joy in praising the abundance of someone's good qualities, why mind? Do you not praise it and delight in this way too? This joy from rejoicing is a blameless source of happiness. The virtuous ones do not prohibit it, and it is the most excellent way to attract others. In Tibetan it sounds better, this 77th verse, but in English it sounds really strange. When one says blameless source of happiness and the virtuous one do not prohibit it, you know. Like the verse 63, without having to give a commentary, if one reads that over and over again, or at a glance, then one might feel that that's something I've heard all the time, or I've heard that from, I didn't have to be a Buddhist to hear this, you know, that one should, that there is no point in, how do you say, that it's pointless to be unhappy when there is when one feels that there is lack of respect, how to say, lack of support for oneself, but when it comes to others, where was I? Yes, that when nasty things happen towards oneself, then we lose patience. But when it comes to others, then we kind of say, it's okay, it's okay. And when it comes to that sort of thing, then often we are like a professor. But when it comes to oneself, then it's very difficult. You suddenly become extremely sensitive. And right now, when I say it that way, it's just said it as a sort of a part of the session. But when you read it to yourself, or when we read it by ourselves, to ourselves, there will be many, I think, occasions where one feels a little bit guilty, you know, that, yeah, I think there was a time I did that, or I'm still doing this, and there's the possibility that I might do this again. And so therefore one might feel sort of cornered or being ashamed, you know. And so therefore it is extremely important, like I said, to think that the author, Shantideva, is not going to gain a sense of pride that he was able to criticize us, you know, for our faults. He's not going to gain anything, nor any of the these realized teachers, that when they point these things out, they're not getting an upper hand, you know, and they're not going to become our authority in any sense. In one point of view, they're dead, you know, they're gone. And even if they're alive, you know, then still they're not going to gain anything. And so therefore it is really purely and most genuinely sort of pointing out to you as if you are his best friend, and he has the best intentions to us. So then if you do it that way, then when someone who we respect, someone we love, when they say things, when they point out the mistakes, there is no. Often it is the case that there is at least lack of ego, right? That you can let that in. And in this case, it's the same thing, if not more. But you can really let them in. Because, first of all, as I said, they're not going to gain anything, and secondly, you're not going to lose anything, you know. And instead, it's going to, if you open yourself to these what looks like criticism, or what looks a little bit harsh or sharp or pinpointed, at the end of the day, by letting that in, letting the teachings in, is going to give us a wonderful time, you know, because we don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know if we're going to wake up tomorrow. We don't know if there is rebirth or not, you know. We've been told that there is rebirth, you know, that you can become a spider or a dolphin, or, maybe you'll be born as an alien next life, and who will not be able to read any of these, you know. Very intelligent, very sophisticated, but because they are too sophisticated, they cannot understand this, you know. Anyway, there is no guarantee, and so all we have is this moment, all we have is this present, and it only makes sense if you can spend this moment with joy. And so, if you want that to happen, then if you let these teachings in, then that's the only thing that will happen, is that we will make this moment worthwhile. And so that's how I feel. I'm not saying I'm an expert to it, but that at least I can understand that. And so then it goes on, such as when someone violates images, stupas, and so on. It sounds like religious war. But we can view that, we can use that kind of, we can change the context, you know, in short. So it could be discrediting the name, the legacy, the heritage of someone you love, someone you care, someone you respect. So it could be your family or friends or your community. In this case, they may not be enlightened, but even then, no matter what kind of mental or verbal or physical, actions are done towards them, it may, or most likely, or maybe obviously it will affect you, of course, because you're a human being, or we are a human being. And so therefore, it's normal to feel those emotions, but to give in to them, then it's something else. And so therefore, in here, I think it's basically saying that we have the ability to give in to anger when that kind of things happen. But if you do, from a traditional sense, then we will fail as a Bodhisattva. So if that sounds good, then you can think that way. But if that doesn't make much sense, then if you give in to our emotions, particularly in this case, anger, that anger is not going to do anything in reality. That's the truth of it. It's not going to change or alter the course of time, Whatever was committed, whatever crime was committed, it's not going to change it. Why? Because just like I said before, whatever that seemed to have taken place, it's completely gone. Not a trace of it has left. The only thing that is left is the collection of memories that seems to suggest that it did take place, but that's about it, And so therefore there is, because you see in this case we are calling, giving into anger means it's like sort of calling the anger from afar, and bring heavenly justice on these souls. So it doesn't work like that, because those who have committed those crimes, first of all, they are all gone. There may be a very similar pattern of them that seems to live. Often it feels like when someone is not very meritorious and always seems to accumulate a lot of negative merit, they seem to live very long, Somehow they don't seem to get sick. Whereas anyone who's trying to now really open their heart towards practice, suddenly they have bankruptcy, their friends die, they get terminal cancer, and so on, So, yes, it may look and that strange and negative, but the truth is, it's only a pattern of that criminal, or it's only a pattern of yourself that feels like, I witnessed all of this, I saw it firsthand, I felt it firsthand, and so therefore, instead of calling the police or lawyers, because they will always arrive somewhat late, or the doctors, By the time the doctor appears, the symptoms is gone. And you still argue with the doctor that I did have pain, and it felt like this, and you describe it in full detail, but the doctor just nods and sort of tries to agree with you so that, you won't get further angry. But that's about it. The doctor kind of knows that it's gone, So that's the thing. It's only a very similar pattern is or seems to be appearing. But that's all there is, because the actual moment is gone. And so therefore, if you use anger to bring justice, it's just not going to do the trick. All you will be left with is a state of very disturbed mind or disturbed heart. Disturbed mind and closed heart. Yes, and then in the case of now monuments like spiritual monuments that are of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, teachers, and so on, and then precious texts, libraries, the list goes on, yeah? In that case, then even, how to say, even more so, in this case, not to give in to anger, because to say they don't need a vengeance, you know. They themselves are already free. And the monuments are just monuments. You know, they're not, even if they are precious relics, how to say, it's just bones. It's just, if it's hair, it's just hair. If it's, I don't know, whatever part of it, it could be the clothing, or it could be a sacred shoe, or I don't know. You know, it's just that. You know, there's nothing miraculous about it. To say that, oh, this shoe was some millennia ago, some angels came and and offered this to this very special Buddha, and it's made of I don't know, the phoenix's skin, you know, and then it has been worn by this Buddha for hundreds of years, and very carefully it's been preserved till now. And if you touch it, it'll fall into dust. And then someone naughty came at the museum and just you know, and, oh my goodness, you know. So yes, that sort of things have happened, you know, many, many times before, in the name of religion. So, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to them, those monuments mean nothing. To us, actually, if we can understand it in that way, then we can let go, and most importantly, not lose our bodhicitta, our aspiration. So yes, endurance. That we feel, as I said, like a protector, you know, like a guard for our loved ones, and for our spiritual friends, teachers, fellow practitioners, friends, communities, societies, and so on. And then we feel that when they are being harmed, or you know, if it's just verbal abuse, or just, you know, annoying gestures, it's still, you know, one can still endure, yes. But if it's physical harm, then it's really, really difficult, yes, at times. Or it can be unbearable in many ways. And so, once again, one might feel very strongly that I have to do something about it. I cannot just stand here and watch, you know. There are many cases like that. And in many ways, we have to accept that it's not a piece of cake, just to say it's okay. But in this case, what Shantideva is saying is that there are things you can do, you know. There are a lot of things you can do. But just don't get angry, and don't get upset, and don't give in to your anger. Because if you do, then what you can do will be disrupted. Because there are things you can do which will help or how to say, in an indirect way, it will help them tremendously. But if you give in to anger, then whatever you can do, how to say, the action will be very much distorted. And so therefore, he says, at all costs, just don't let, how to say, anger be, how to say, don't let the anger sort of contaminate what you can do. So, for example, now, in our case, we have to understand that physically, what can we do, actually? Not much, you know. We have only 2 arms, we only have a certain amount of strength, no matter how much muscle we build, you know. No matter how quick a reflex we can train, no matter how good we are in finance, no matter how good we are in politics, no matter how good we are in medicine, no matter how good we are in managing, you just cannot stop, you know. Certain things that happens, and so therefore immediately, or at least develop with time, so that when those moments happen, then you can how to say, do things that you can, that you have some sort of control over. Meaning, first thing and foremost, you have the power, you have the ability, you have the control not to give in to anger, you know, the core of all things. Then you will have clarity. And when you have clarity, then it's almost like being a little bit professional, you know. But it's nothing to do with being heartless. But it's like saying you have great awareness, you have great common sense. And so it depends on the situation. Then there are things you can do. Maybe you can make provisions for somebody who's hungry. Maybe you can make provisions for somebody who needs medical care. Or maybe some needs just comforting words, you know, a shoulder to cry on, or various things, you know. Because if you give in to anger, what's going to happen in many ways, I mean, what we can perceive is that, yes, the people you care might feel loved in some ways, you know, but it will be a very mixed message. It will be a message of sort of, it's like discrediting love, actually, yeah. Meaning that then they will feel that love means get angry, you know, and do more violence, you know. And then they will kind of associate the two together. And somebody didn't get angry when I was being humiliated, or when I was being harmed or injured. And so I think this person lacks feeling, this person lacks humanity, or this person doesn't love me, and so on. And so therefore, it can sort of distort the image of kindness or love. So, if we remove that anger, then we have clarity, and if we are a little bit well versed with the power of aspiration, then we know, or we know to a certain degree, that whatever we think is solid now, you know, solid, strong, visible, healthy, upright, proud, meaning this very strong feeling of this is me, this is who I am. It's, how to say, conjured, or it's it came into being through aspirations. Very simple aspirations, and collective of aspirations, and repeated aspirations. And due to that, each of us who are here right now, where we can feel that this is me, this is us, how to say, it's a result or it's resulted or caused by aspirations. And so therefore, then we will have the clarity that I can make aspirations. Then, how to say, that'll not harm the bodhicitta, and in the long run, it'll help everyone who is affected. But first and foremost is just not giving into anger, meaning that destructive feeling. Because if there was a destruction, if you create further destruction, it's just, if you add those two up, then there is more destruction, but not less, And so therefore that's something to reflect. In the next verse, like 66, in this 66th verse, then it talks about karma. And when any kind of harm, well, basically continuing what I was just saying, when harm seems to be inflicted either towards oneself or towards someone we know, someone we care, someone we respect, what can we really do, repeating once again. There is not much we can do. And in this verse, it's saying that to allow ourselves to think that it is karma, That seems to be the most peaceful way, most profound way of, not, furthering the destruction or making the situation worse. And so, because now onwards through these verses, it goes on to say that it's karma, meaning that whenever we sort of give in to anger, yes, when we try to use that as our sort of friend, as I said earlier, we think that it's going to do something, that it's going to complete a course, complete a cycle. That, the famous feeling that we have of vengeance, that I have avenged my family, or I have avenged my friends, I have avenged my lineage, things like that. Strange things comes up. Very strange things. Whereas the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have not once have uttered the word kill or harm or starve or get angry, Yet when one has given oneself away to anger, then it finds very strange ways to venerate our loved ones, our respected ones, by using anger. And in that way, even from a worldly point of view, it doesn't really make sense, But, of course, when we're in the heat of the moment, the heat of that anger, then anything is justified. Because that's what emotions do. Emotions just roughly estimate that this is it, Because the reality just keeps changing. As I said, the person keeps changing because the actual criminal, even though it may be alive today, but that person, he or she, every part, blood, flesh, skin, bones, everything has changed, Either maybe it has shed skin or down the toilet, through time, through weather, through temperature, everything, yes. So if that person seems to be alive today, it's all due to what that person ate last night or this morning, and what that person drank, and that's about it. It just, there seems to be a stream of that water, but it's not the same water. And so therefore it just doesn't make sense because the actual criminal is gone. But emotion says that it doesn't matter, just do something, Punk. And then if the person says, ow, then you feel, yes, I did something. I dedicate this to you, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and so on, But it's just complete mess. It just doesn't work like that. And the person who got just hit also is quite confused. But because of your anger, because you did something, the terrible thing is the chain reaction is that then this person feels that, oh, I got hit because I did that, And you kind of confirm to that person that it's the same you. And that's the most terrifying thing, It's your anger has taught the criminal to believe that you haven't changed. You are the same, meaning your yesterday is still here, And then that creates chain reaction, and then maybe a friend of his or hers wants to take revenge on you now, And then you get hit and you say, ow, and then you further sort of re-energize and prove that you are also the same, Yesterday's you also is alive today. So like that, it continuously just circles around, and that's why we call samsara, Whereas the reality is that it's completely gone. Yes, from a certain sort of level, we can check the DNA and so on and find the helix and so on. But that is still a very rough estimation, because it means that at the moment we only have a certain level of magnifying glass, What do you call that scope? Microscope, microscope. Because maybe after, now that the technology is advancing, maybe after 10 years, 20 years, maybe we will find another telescope a microscope, and then find that, oh, actually the DNA changes because now it was able to zoom in more. And then now what to do? Do we pardon all the, justice that was served to others, say sorry? You see, so therefore, it's just strange, It just goes on like that, yeah. So therefore, we can never say who is guilty. So as it says here, among them, whom do we call innocent and who do we call guilty? Because someone is under the delusion and you giving into your anger, then obviously is also another form of delusion, thinking that you can avenge, And so therefore, at the end of the day, it's just human doing things to humans. Yeah, that's it. Or if you have to include animals, then sentient beings doing things to sentient beings. But if you're born in hell, then it's kind of okay, Because the realm of hell is a place where we can exercise to the utmost of hitting each other. And it is said that as time progresses here, in that realm, it's also advancing there, So if you have atomic power here, they have better things, better equipment. And so it's like a kindergarten, but with very destructive things. And so therefore then you can have a hell of a time. And you don't have to, and the reset is fun. It's just like video game. Because as you seem to die, you are reset, like magically, and then you can continue the fun over and over again. So there you can let your anger out completely. But over here, it's just, if you do it, we won't grow our arms, magically here. Whereas over there, it does. So therefore, it doesn't matter, You can hack off any limbs. And so, yeah, it's strange. Right, so now we are nearing that time. So, if you have questions, I would allow, well, just one or two. Online, eh? Okay. 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 Yes. Yeah. Yes, what she said is true. It's too much information. In short, just don't be angry, Okay.
I had to add too much out of my fantasy.
Okay. 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 I try to roughly read all the questions so that then maybe if I'm intelligent enough, work my way around it so that I can put everything together. Actually, I would prefer today if just one of you just ask a question related to the subject. Yes.
I don't have a question, but
Okay.
if anyone would like to ask a question, maybe you
Okay.
can step forward. Question related to this subject.
Hello.
No.
First of all, thank you. The question is, so how to work with anger on different levels, how to,
Okay.
what to do in different situations.
Great.
When you're caught, when you're like seeing it coming,
Yes.
and when you're in stupid situation, something like that.
One of the most noblest and courageous tradition that we have, that we can deploy, is the moment you see it coming, you run the other way. Tuck tails and just run away. Yes. I mean, I really appreciate your question because probably, of course, also in here, someone also has written, can I say something about sadness also? I'm sorry, I will. Okay, you also ask.
Okay. Your Holiness, thank you so much for your teachings. And I wanted to ask you about anger and fear.
Yes.
I don't know how they're related. Are they
Yes.
relatives or they're just like good friends?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will, if it's okay, I will just focus on these two questions. Yes? Yeah. Yes, I often thought that they were very good friends. Fear and anger. In moment of brilliance, actually, I wrote some things down on my phone, those days. But I don't remember at the moment. There were moments I felt like, my goodness, I could be a poet. Yeah, I wrote something like, the real enemy is like a knot. There isn't anything else or anyone else. Not, because there is no real, of course, one of the things that I liked about Lord of the Rings is because is because the enemies were just orcs, yeah. So therefore, it's so easy, Actually, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you had enemies like that, like real, terrorists in the form of orcs, or my preferred choice would be the Uruk-hai. They look strong, particularly the one character called Lutz, I think. or Lutz, I don't know. But the thing is, unfortunately, it doesn't come in that form. In the teachings it says that it comes in the form of very loving friends and families and best of friends, you know. And so therefore it's very difficult to locate them and see them. So it's very difficult to, because if you could spot someone like an orc, you can run away, you know, or you can choose to fight. But the actual enemies come in the, how to say, most perfect disguises. So therefore, there is no chance to run away. And so therefore, I just happen to think that enemies are like, or we call it obstacles, cause of anger, cause of disturbance, situations, circumstances, because sometimes the enemy comes in the form of someone, sometimes it comes in the form of, let's say, something else, not someone, like taxes, you know. Or, of course, it could be illnesses. And so therefore, we can never put up the right kind of fences and wear the right kind of armor and put on the right kind of shield and so on. Because the moment you do that, then the enemy works in mysterious ways, you know. So therefore it will find a way to infiltrate in the most imaginative of ways. So therefore I thought the enemy kind of looks like a knot, you know. Particularly the kind of knot that I really dislike is when I was small, I saw my mother, she often used to use the sewing kit to mend, you know, clothes, because of course I would have torn sleeves from playing around, and then just as all kids do, they like to copy their parents, of what they do. So I also tried to pick up sewing. Only at that time, of course. And it was fun to sort of stitch things, to use the needle. The hardest part was, initially the hardest part was putting the thread through the needle hole. But you get used to it, you know. You learn tricks of the trade. All you do is just wet the tip of the thread and then it works. And then, what do you call that on the finger that you put? Huh? Thimble. Pinball? Thimble. Oh, thimble. And so it was a lot of fun. But one thing that I really disliked was, now, when that sewing thread, if it got jumbled up, then, now, untying that knot was the worst thing ever. Yeah. Because if it's a rope, I think, or if it's chains or some other type of thread, I think it might have been okay. But with sewing, thread, it was just unbearable, you know. And so therefore, yeah, this is just my own personal thought, that it's like it's like a knot. In its origin, it's actually a clear, string with, clear, pristine, But if left unchecked, meaning if there is lack of awareness, then very quickly it can form into a knot. And it's actually almost impossible to untie that. That to a point where you feel like you just have to just let go and discard it, So, this obstacle that comes in various form and what we call enemy is like that. In its, one could say, primordial state, it's just like a string. It's very clear, very plain, very pristine. But if we lack awareness, then very slowly things gets piled up, And then, in this case, the fear is that once it has become a knot of tremendous size, then it's daunting, you feel heavy, you feel that it's impossible, and then you lose courage. And so therefore, that's how I think fear appears in this case. And then suddenly a very spontaneous thing comes up, and then you just want to throw it away, and think that it's not my problem. Not that it was my problem in the first place, but then you label it that way, that it's not my problem. And it's someone else's problem, or I discredit you, I take away your value thing. And so if there is, I think, awareness, meaning, that time earlier I said how to build awareness, by doing the most mundane things. Then there is, first of all, no room for fear, because to count one step at a time, it's the simplest of tasks, To remember the last 18 hours or 16 hours, it's not that difficult. But if you have to remember last 1 week, last 1 month, last 1 year, and then last one rebirth, then it's very daunting, because if you haven't paid enough attention or awareness, then it gets jumbled up like a knot, and then you just want to get rid of it. And so therefore, that's how enemies seem to form, out of nowhere, actually from something really good in a way, That thread is actually nothing bad, yes. It can do wonderful things. It can mend clothes. All the fabrics that we wear, the way they're put together, at the end of the day, it's all due to the very simple thread, which actually, if you just pull it like this, it'll break, But when you put it together in the right way, through the way it's weaved, or even the fabric itself, it's tremendously strong, and and so therefore there is no real enemy. Anyway, this is just a different take. So therefore, if you feel that this is too much information, because I commentated a bit on the text, now I'm saying totally different, So you don't have to feel that, this is too much. Just, keep it in your pocket here, there, because maybe a certain perspective may be helpful to some of you. So therefore, I'm just giving, variety here. So you don't have to unify, okay? That's the most important thing. Anger and fear, I think they come hand in hand together. Because anger is like, in this case, a defense mechanism. And fear comes from feeling that I don't know this. Who are you? Whereas actually it was the very same thread that just happened to form into a knot, So therefore, my mother used to say, if you want to become wise, then you have to learn how to untangle that knot, So it was a challenge for me, like a game. Yeah. And I think we have to sort of make it enjoyable when we tackle things like this, because anger is a very strong subject and an issue that we sort of deal with in our society, and so we have to make it fun. We have to make it a game. That doesn't mean that we don't respect or we are not serious about life and social issues and problems, but we have to make little bit light, Yeah. Otherwise, we will feel how can we gain, complete awareness. Obviously, just out of nowhere, it won't happen. It will happen one. And so therefore, one step. So then we call it accumulation, we call it building, we call it aggregation, but it's not really that. It's actually just, we don't, accumulate actually the awareness or, grow the awareness actually. It's just that one moment was well spent, And in that one moment there was no fear. And in that one moment there was no anger. And that's something we can rejoice. Yeah. And then if you happen to die after that, it was a good death, And if you're not dead and if you're still alive, it is a good life. Yeah. So I think it's like that. Yeah. So with that in mind, then we do the meditation of Jenrezik. And so Jenrezik, at the end, just like Late Gyalwa used to say, we cannot differentiate anger from ourselves when we are angry, It's just the formality of language to say when, but actually there is no real when, there is no real history, and so therefore when you're angry, then you are exactly that, and nothing more, nothing less. And so therefore we use that, we bring that into the context of just practicing compassion or kindness or loving kindness, same thing. When we meditate, we kind of just switch off, one could say, or just don't bother about time, And we just let, we can call it emotion, we can call it feeling, we can call it a state of mind, whatever we call it, in that in this formal time, it doesn't matter, and in that moment, then you are compassion, you are loving kindness. There is no cause and conditions why you became compassionate and so on. All those have been done, prior to it, during studies and contemplation, through mind training, this progressive thing which we are also used to. But when we meditate, there is no real room for that, or you don't even need it. You are it, you are the compassion, you are loving kindness. And whether you can imagine yourself extremely pale, imagine yourselves extremely pale, with 2 extra arms, sitting on a flower, it's up to you, it doesn't matter. Actually, I have a hard time visualizing the jewel that the genetic holds, I have a sort of awkward shape of how that jewel looks like, because his hands are not like this, but pretty much like this. So it must be sort of a flattened out jewel, sort of like squeezed, So, yeah, visualization is good. Yes, it is. Visualization is one of those methods that is not prohibited by the virtuous ones. Because visualization is a kind of distraction in a way. But in this case, maybe we can call it a good distraction. Yeah? And so if you can visualize, very good. If you're comfortable with it, very good. If you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to force yourself. All you have to know is that the melody, the words, we can call it a song, we can call it a hymn, we can call it whatever we like. So when we recite that, obviously it will not be very familiar with you because it's in a foreign language. So it will be just noise. And so therefore, all you need to do is just, just like saying, be angry, in this case, be compassionate, So just without having to have a particular target, yeah. So meaning you don't have to suddenly search for a particular sentient being, You don't have to think of a particular animal. You don't need any real target or a specific number of sentient beings, a group, or a vast number of sentient beings. In this case, you're just, if I say you're just love, it's very cheesy. Probably a better way to say is how to be loving. How to be loving, if you say, then awareness. Yeah. You let your senses completely sort of do its thing, I'm not saying you have to heighten your senses as if there's a dial, but you let all of your senses sort of be, yeah. And then the text we read, the sadhana we read, if we know the verses, it's very good. If you don't know the verses, doesn't matter. But you can be rest assured that, how to say, each verse, each word, each consonant, each verb is all to do with compassion. And so therefore you can trust that blindly. And then you let your awareness be, meaning if you feel a sensation, like a burning sensation around your knees, from sitting too long, or a backache, you don't block it, And fortunately these days, I think this course was really pleasant in terms of weather also, because normally around this time it's quite hot. So we're very lucky that we don't need to use air conditioning, we can just sit very comfortably without being cooked alive. And so therefore, I'm not therefore, anyway, it's just whatever thoughts that comes up in between, you don't judge them, you try not to judge them, you try not to grasp them, you let them come, you let them go, just like the air we breathe. And you basically, just like how you let how we let each of our organs do their thing, just like that, we just let it be, and we just follow the sadhana. And then towards the end, when we recite the Amitabha prayer, or Pure Land prayer, then we dedicate that merit. So a merit that is accumulated out of awareness, merit that is accumulated out of compassion, is immeasurable, and so dedicating that is very, very nice, because how to say, we don't feel that there is anything that we want to expect in return. A merit that is accumulated out of compassion has no expectation. No expectation that I wish the weather will change, or I wish the times will get better, or I wish that someone's thought process may change, There's no such sort of expectation. And so therefore, because it has no expectation, when you give it away, also it's very free. There's no one behind it. So, okay.
shi se nora gu lai cha je me ba tam se dere de da che be gom che la nyam gora je ba me para che de la me gom je go ora son ba xin ngài tere go che be lai mai la jen da so vai de be gom che la che ye warai chen de la ye men goim de ngoi shire son ba xin kai cha do be ngo wo soi ma de ma che de gara jo be gom che la gom cha lo dan tra lai wa rai chen je lai nam do ngo wo che gu ru song pa shi ye ya ma ye chara wa la ma ga ro loi bara chara ve gom che la korai de yere me to bara chen de loi ke wa gan de yang dai lai ma tang da lai me che je long che ting dan da lai je yan de ne rai zo ne Toro je chan je ga ba nyara da sho san je che da zo je cho na la chan ju para do da ne cha so che da je gom de je be so nam je do loi pen che re san je do bara sho san je che da zo je cho nam la san je para do da ne cha so che ta je gom de je be se nam de do lai pen je re san je do bara sho san je che do so je cho na la san je para do ya so che da je gom de ge be sa nam je do lai pen che re san je do ba ra sho da so ga je ba sem chen che e zo pe ga ra da ve den Pele pa joy chere se karazoi nga den choi ze zoi do je chen je ze hoi je doi boi talai jarai ze zhen pe garai nam Tara dai ren jen gen je che Re da ba be te yo soloi U boi me be wo jen jen Tam ne doro je che do jo Che me da varai ja den ba Kanda ngwa vai jarai cho vai kenje ma ge kanda garai zo zai je je wo lai jen to je jen je do lai ze ere ze lai cha chai loi Tavai kenje magu gondoi gar Zozai geje ulangen Toje jenje drolai ze Ere cha cha loi Tavai kenje magu gondoi kara Zozai geje ulai jen Toje jenje drolai ze Tere Chazai loi pai bai jere ze wan doi Thôi je de samai sho bai ye Gyalwa se je dam je lai Kene thang ve cha chai loi Dai de be mara me che Yalo ze rolo mo la soi ba Gom jara ye je choloi ne boloi Pa pe choi je she zoi zoi Ta ma me ne ta de para Menge che da cha me nga Chem ne nye mo wan jara we De boy dam je sha barai je Yen de ran jaloi chan jo sem O zoi ge voi la soi be Te zoi je voi che zoi be Te namai la ne da ye rang Sem je nam je san ba da Lo ye che da warai Te join to moi tek ba ye Te je kora loi kora doi soloi Kora vai che ze mai doi warai Yang e men doi to je ye Dong ai ja zui ching wa ye Dem je nam lai se su so loi Dai je Am je chan je jor chur ne Rembo me doi dra wa ye Rembe palai do dai jarai je Te darai je solai dai pe Pai be go le vesere choi Ma dai le noi choi je ja Tenen de vai chen je Quan chơi gần đỡ ra về lại mà chơi chơi nhau gần đỡ ra về lại mà chơi kêu bơi chơi nhau bể đê na ra dê bơi đê lại mu ran chơi nhà mòn thế gian có đói chế bara de jalai boy nam thế sẽ ngã de da duro je le ba sen gue je jo dai garana duro je jalai boy la soi be Rama ba ye den ba jo na lai za me ja nga de ze nga ja ji Rama za je be za am re da za ji ra da yen ja ba che ba ra shi ngā dāng sāng wē chē bā dāi dē gu nā yē gu sāng chē bē chē kē jē jē dāi yēn dē zō bā dē nē chē jē jē dō bē gā sāng jē Ba ma le ba ye de bara je je lai de zo ba da ba ne da zo gu lai cho da de ma je ngai zho den do de lai zo lo wa thang Barai jere ne bala jere je ye la tam je ge je za ne la drum ne karama ba ye je ba gna da je ma le nyar de je ba da Karama ba ye de la ne che na da je da la wa shen de lo ba ye ne ba da ni de da la de so la te da ra che de be je wa de Manjara java sem je dam je guna zobe sanje gabai tha chere ngoy ma vai nganjara sanje na vai da ye zo jo to je chen bo da Yen da sen bai do je do na lai zan je jan sen bai koro je koro de je ngan zai ba do me ba ye de wa je we jen gam de re da je de ne je bai jur ma da je wa shen je Parai mai che bai ro Rai je ne nan Shalai doi jai de je dai je me la mai da bai de Cha ja zan je ja zi me dam je me ra bai chen je la de zol Eya da penja de ya awai boda na ya so hai cho de ya wai ze je go zo ni zo lai je ye ra da xin de zo je zo bai gun jo son lai che ban bul da ve Gyalwa sem je gu lai ngoi Droga zonje do jero je je zai dam je che dende da shen ju lai men jero je jem ne da ne so zo de Tsere ne me nyam do bele se de sa je nen jero je Namshe chebe jirama do de wa chen do je jiro che kene pe ma kha che de le tene de la san je sho dan jai dan ne je de do je be jo wa Jembo sho so nine de ye tam je se ba ne tam ne ne da nine pam che de ye ga no che ba lai cho ba ye be zo le do wan do lo wa ra sho don jo ze ne re ne bo che ma je ba no ma ke joro che
Dear friends, please stay few seconds in the Gompa, few minutes, let's say, because we have some new announcements important for all of you and all of us. So please listen carefully. One very important thing.